Welcome to my performance-based project for Models of Teaching, EDU 513. My name is Kristen Jordan, and my project covers life in Pittsburgh 100 years ago. I chose to do my project on Understanding by Design, also known as Backward Design, by Wiggins and McTee. My project will cover a unit I previously taught and will teach again on Pittsburgh history, specifically life in Pittsburgh about 100 years ago, how people lived, what Pittsburgh citizens brought to the world stage, etc. This series of lessons was designed as a supplemental enrichment course for students, and as such there was not a lot of homework assigned. This class met, or will meet, once per week for 1 hour for a total of 6 weeks. The background you see of the smiley emoticon is crucial because Pittsburgh is credited with inventing the smiley face emoticon in 1982, 30 years ago, at Carnegie Mellon University. Stage 1 of Understanding by Design talks about achieving desired results. We want to establish goals. What relevant goals will this design address? For example, what content standards, what course or program objectives, or learning outcomes will this design actually address? First of all, I want my students to be able to understand life in Pittsburgh about 100 years ago. I want them to understand how people lived, how they worked, and how they played. Secondly, I want my students to understand the impact that prominent and famous Pittsburghers had on our city. And I also want them to be able to understand the impact that these citizens had on the world around us with their inventions and their innovations. Stage 1 of Understanding by Design talks about what are the big ideas. You see George Ferris here in the background, and he is credited with inventing the Ferris wheel. George Ferris was not originally from Pittsburgh, but he moved to Pittsburgh and became an iron worker and bridge builder, and he took his knowledge and translated that into a rotating wheel. The Ferris wheel today is enjoyed by many people the world over. In continuing with the big ideas, they are the ideas that Pittsburgh made many important discoveries and contributions to the world around us that forever changed how we lived, worked, and played. This picture is a picture of Mr. George Westinghouse of the Westinghouse Electric Company. He is credited with giving us a form of electricity that we still use in our houses today, known as the alternating current, which is vastly different from Thomas Edison's direct current. If we did not have alternating current, many of our appliances would not be able to run today. Mr. Westinghouse also invented the air brake for trains, making the ability to stop trains much simpler and easier, and of course safer. Mr. Andrew Carnegie invented the steel empire, and of course Pittsburgh was known as the Steel City for many years. It is still one of its nicknames. He chose the three rivers of Pittsburgh for his steel empire because of the easy access on the rivers for transportation of his materials and goods, and for building of his large steel plants. Without Mr. Andrew Carnegie choosing to build here in Pittsburgh, I highly doubt if we would have changed the world as much as we did. This is Henry Clay Frick, and he was a business rival with Mr. Andrew Carnegie. However, Mr. Andrew Carnegie could not have succeeded without Mr. Frick, because Mr. Frick invented a way to heat the steel furnaces longer and hotter through a product called coke, which is baked coal. He and Mr. Carnegie were extreme rivals, much like Westinghouse and Edison. Mr. H.J. Heinz was from Pittsburgh, and in my personal opinion, there is only one type of ketchup, and we have Mr. Henry J. Heinz to thank. He's actually standing here with his family in front of the Phipps Conservatory. More advancements came in the field of medicine and technology. This is a picture of Dr. Jonas Salk giving a young patient one of the very first polio vaccines, which he is credited with inventing. This is a picture of Dr. Thomas Starzl, head of the transplant team at one time for UPMC. He pioneered the first multi-organ transplant in the 1980s. Pittsburgh is now a world leader in medicine, in both adults and children. Other big ideas continue with specific understandings. What do I desire for my students to learn? This background picture is the very first movie theater ever in the entire country. It opened in Pittsburgh at the turn of the 20th century in the early 1900s. This is the Nickelodeon, as it was so named. Specific understandings include medical advances that I previously mentioned, socioeconomic contributions, such as those to television with PBS and WQED Pittsburgh, KDKA Radio, the steel industry and its key players, famous musicians, artists, etc. Also included in specific understandings will be the life of the everyday man, such as clothing, housing, and the general household setup for the average middle-class family, and learning how the family structure determined their everyday lives. This picture is important because Pittsburgh was credited with inventing the first pull tab for aluminum cans. Today we have those pop-top rocker tops that snap open easily. But in order to open cans, this was around the late 1950s, early 1960s, the pull tab was designed. You can see that the tab actually pulls completely off of the can. Sometimes in using understanding by design, there are misunderstandings that can be predictable. I predict that my students may misunderstand and mix up various inventors and innovators and their contributions. This is a background picture of Mr. Andy Warhol, a very famous Pittsburgher, and he does have a museum here in Pittsburgh known as the Andy Warhol Museum that displays his artwork. My students might not also be able to recall why such inventions and innovations changed the world. In continuing with understanding by design, we come to the essential questions. Mr. Fred Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was famous for asking some of these essential questions. Questions that were provocative, in such that they would foster inquiry, understanding, and a transfer of learning. We have famous people to thank like Arnold Palmer for designing some of the world's best golf courses, and a famous drink that people do enjoy called the Arnold Palmer, which is a half mix of lemonade and iced tea. We also have to thank Don Knotts for giving us comedy. Although he was not a true Pittsburgher, he was from Morgantown, West Virginia, and a WVU alumni. His wealth and knowledge brought comedy to the world stage. Mr. Frank Conrad invented the radio, specifically KDKA radio, out of a garage in his home in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. I want my students to know and to think, what was life like 100 years ago? Do we have the same technology as today? Was there technology? And after you learn about life long ago, do you think that you could live like people did back then? Mr. Gene Kelly was a famous Pittsburgher, and here he's shown in his most famous movie, In Singing in the Rain. Mr. Henry Mancini is most well known for his musical compositions, specifically the Pink Panther. We've had some very famous Pittsburghers in sports. Honest Wagner. We've had Jerome Bettis. We've had Mario Lemieux. And we've had Roberto Clemente. We've also had famous female artists and inventors as well. Rachel Carson was known for being green before it was cool to be green. She wrote the book Silent Spring. I want my students to be able to identify prominent Pittsburgh citizens and their contributions and be able to communicate that knowledge to their family, friends, and amaze them with all the facts about Pittsburgh, and begin to realize that Pittsburgh had a major impact on shaping the world in the 19th and 20th centuries, and it will continue to do so throughout the 21st century. I want my students to be able to share that knowledge and be able to take that knowledge and apply it to their daily lives. Stage 2 of Understanding by Design talks about assessment evidence. Through what authentic performance tasks will my students be able to demonstrate the understandings of the lessons? These performance tasks for this particular enrichment series of lessons on Pittsburgh history will conclude with having an optional project that can range from journal entries, taking a 24-hour time period and trying to live without modern conveniences, electricity, running water, etc., and writing about their experiences, to writing a letter to a long-ago pen pal and trying to explain things like text messaging, cell phones, social media accounts like Facebook and Twitter, digital cameras, the internet, things like that, to art projects. Students may want to choose to express themselves creatively, or even performing experiments like brushing your teeth or washing your hair as they did so long ago and discussing the results of their efforts. My students will have an opportunity to share their chosen project with the class. The previous picture showed an average middle-class parlor. For a typical family, this parlor reflects the Frick family. Very much different in terms of decor and decadence. A typical Victorian bedroom here, you can see it's very dark and dreary and drab, and I often ask my students, does this look like your bedroom at home? Does it have a fireplace? Does it have big windows? What's missing? The socioeconomic status often determined what kind of bedroom you had. This was a bedroom of Helen Frick, a daughter of Henry Clay Frick. This is a picture of a 1900s Victorian-style bathroom, and when people said they were, quote, going to the bathroom, it did not have the same connotation as it does today. It literally meant they were going to go take a bath, because for most, indoor plumbing was a convenience that they could not afford. And so outhouses and chamber pots were the norm. My students get to learn that there were other conveniences that seem antiquated, of course, today, but the coal stove was the heart of the home. It heated the entire home for water, for baking, for cooking, etc. And trying to get them to understand things about the icebox and how it relates to the refrigerator, their comments are often very interesting. I try to explain to my students that washing and drying clothes is nothing like it is today, and that maybe they shouldn't complain as much when they have chores to do. My students will be able to and be expected to listen to each other. And there will be criteria of how they're going to be judged. I want them to be able to give constructive feedback and listen attentively on their shared project. However, the projects are not graded in this class because it is a class that is for enrichment purposes only. I think if we had to totally rely on drying our clothes out on the line, we would be hard-pressed to get anything done in today's society. Other evidence in understanding by design, such as quizzes, tests, academic prompts, observation, homeworks, and journals, can help my students demonstrate their learning and achievement of the desired results and outcomes that I previously mentioned. There will not be any quizzes or tests, as this class is not graded and is purely for enrichment purposes. These next few slides show transportation around the turn of the century. We have streetcars, you'll see horseless carriages, you'll see cars, steam trains, etc. My students will have ample opportunity to ask questions, and depending on the makeup of the class and the questions asked will determine the path lessons actually take. My class is open for enrollment from 3rd through 12th graders. My students will be able to reflect upon and assess their learning through self-assessment. We will have an optional field trip that will be offered to students who live in the Pittsburgh area or who wants to join us. We will tour the Frick Museum and Historical Center, where students can see and touch objects in a real late 19th century or early 20th century house that has been restored. Each field trip, depending on the time of the year, has the option to add on additional tour items such as the playhouse, the greenhouse, or the car and carriage museum. There's also the art gallery and fun themed projects. These projects include things like letterboxing and hoop rolling, all social activities of life long ago. Stage 3 and the final stage of Understanding by Design talks about the learning plan. The learning activities focus on where to, and that is an acronym for how this lesson will actually break itself down. The W in where to is to help the students know where the unit is going and what is expected. This is also to help the teacher to know where the students are coming from, prior knowledge, interests, etc. My unit would start out the first week by taking students on a virtual tour of famous Pittsburgh landmarks and asking them questions along the way as we move throughout the slides. The second week would start off with famous Pittsburghers and their contributions to the world around us. The third week covers the life of a middle-class family in the turn-of-a-century house that has been restored. It is called the 1900 House from PBS Productions. And it's actually a house that was restored in England, and a family lived there for several weeks, as a family did in the 19th century. The fourth week talks about what people did for leisure and social activities of life 100 years ago. For example, this is a picture of a family on the beach, and you can see that their beachwear does not look like our beachwear does today. The fifth week asked students what technology was available back then and how have things changed since then. The fifth week is also the week that the optional project will be assigned. And the sixth week is an open discussion forum for sharing their projects and a general sharing of the experiences of the class. This is a picture of the Pittsburgh Zoo, and the H of the where to might start with something like this, or perhaps that smiley emoticon. I want to hook all my students and hold their interest in things that are relevant to them. So I might start off with, did you know that Pittsburgh invented that smiley emoticon? Or, what about McDonald's and the Big Mac? And did you also know we invented the banana split? It's true. Strickler's Drug in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. By showing my students and taking them on a virtual tour of famous people and places, it seems to hold their interest, and by showing them objects that they can relate to, for example, this pair of ice skates, or this sled for wintertime activities. They really seem to grasp that people still did what they like to do for fun, even though it was a long period ago. The E in Where To talks about how to equip students and help them experience key ideas and explore key issues. By providing slides that I have previously created with accurate facts, ones that are obtained through research and reputable websites for Pittsburgh history, along with visual aids such as pictures, authentic photographs, and charts, I'm able to take my students back in time and help them explore the culture and life of people who came before them. The R in Where To provides opportunities to rethink and revise their understandings and work. Each class period allows for students to constantly ask questions and be provided feedback. When they ask a question that I cannot answer right away, I will always write it down to do research on it and to be answered during the next class session. Pittsburgh has had a very prominent past and known as the Smoky City. And for E in Where To, I want to allow my students to evaluate their work and its implications. And what were some of the implications, such as environmental impact, socioeconomic impact, economic impact, that having such a major steel production and steel plants in the city, what toll did it take on the people, on the city around them? And so for E to evaluate their work. And in order to evaluate their work, they can complete that optional project, share it with the class, and discuss the outcomes. The T for Where To is to be tailored and personalized to the different needs and interests and abilities of my learners. Because each class is different depending on who is enrolled, I'm able to make those modifications due to my background as a special education teacher. Finally, in concluding Understanding by Design is the O in Where To. The O is for Be Organized, and I want to maximize the initial and sustained engagement as well as effective learning. My lessons will be prepared in advance, and the slides will contain engaging pictures and interesting facts to hold my students' attention and interest, and help them demonstrate effective learning through questions and answers and the optional project as we move throughout the 6-week enrichment course. I want to thank you for joining me and listening to my project today. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me at kristen.jordan@pacyber.org. Thank you.